Tonight's film, Xala, is going to be a very exciting event tonight for you to see this, and I'm really pleased that John Mowitt is here to do the introduction and to lead the post-screening conversation. John Mowitt is a professor at the University of Minnesota and in the Department of, Cultural Studies and Comparative Literature, and really pleased to have him here. He is not only a professor, the areas that he works in are certainly those of cultural politics and cultural theory, literary criticism, also in cinema and media studies. He has written quite a number of books, but one that I'd like to point out to you is titled Retakes, Post-Coloniality and Foreign Film Languages. And in that book, he has a chapter on this film. So I hope that you'll look at that as well. So please welcome John Mowitt.
Thank you. Thank you for braving what I've come to refer to simply as Minnesota. What I'm going to do is essentially follow precedent and say a little bit about some things I think if you follow them will help track some important aspects of the film. And then I want to sort of try something a little bit different, but which I think also will help with the same endeavor. So with regard to some specific kinds of things that I think are important to pay attention to, one of the things that I suppose is well known about the film is the sort of specific allegorical or parabolic character of the film. And essential to this is an important relationship that is built pretty much at the sort of relay point between the two registers of the film, if you will, a relationship between sex and politics, or to put it in a slightly different vocabulary, between power and potency. Keeping an eye on how that comes together, how it develops, what are the various component pieces of it, I think is a very important thing to be doing while watching the film. Another dimension of this, and I emphasize this because it might otherwise pass unnoticed, is the casting and the costume designing for the character here who is playing the president of the Chambre de Commerce, the Chamber of Commerce. This figure is made to uncannily, and I would think therefore deliberately, resemble Senghor. And I think part of what you have to sort of understand as well is that this is an effort to enhance the way in which the film, in other respects, quite obviously comments on the moment in Senegalese political history that it emerges from. So that's just something to sort of take note of. When you watch him dancing with Umi at the wedding, it becomes a kind of especially rebel moment. The other thing I would say here is that Sembene is very well known for taking quite seriously and thinking very carefully about the social division of gender, and in particular the status of women in Senegalese history and even in contemporary Senegalese society. One of the important things I think to recognize about this film is that he really moves here to begin exploring a theme which we more typically frame in terms of the issue of how it is that we understand not just difference between men and women, but difference among women. And this film looks very carefully at this dimension of things, and I think it's yet another way in which Sembene's feminism is of an extremely prescient sort. I think, too, you don't want to miss, and I note that, in fact, Charlie has emphasized this in the program notes, so let me just say this quickly. There's a very important set of sort of dueling or contrasting, if you will, modes of expression in the film. The ones that'll hit you right away are the linguistic ones, the tension between Wolof and French. But there are also two musics that are very importantly intertwined in the film. One of them you will hear played on the Xala, banjo-like instrument, and the other will be sort of touched on off and on, but it's the more sort of Afro-Cuban sound of the star band de Dakar. And it's important to note that that band formed really at the moment of independence. And so it has a kind of important way of connecting a particular sonic atmosphere and a form of music to that event. Those musics interact in a way, as I say, that complement and interact with the Wolof-French interaction. Two more things lastly then. One is, one of the things that I think is useful to do in this film is to think a little bit about the ways in which Sembene draws our attention repeatedly to issues of framing, of how events seem to be put inside of a frame and looked at through the frame. This can often be windshields, it can be doors, it can be mirrors, it can be all kinds of things, but I think that there's a very important piece of the film that's taking place at that level, and I urge you to kind of keep track of it. The last sort of piece of information of this kind, I just want you to be sure that you know that the Wolof word kadu means voice or word. This will play an important role in the film, and one of the things that I think you need to hear there is that it's a point at which the film wants to kind of pose the question of language inside the film, as it were. So not just a matter of who's speaking what to whom, but in what ways the issue of where language comes from, who affects it, who's controlling it, et cetera, is something that the film treats rather directly. The second thing that I wanted to do before we looked at the film and listened to the film is to propose, and I'll do this in the spirit of following Brecht's sort of practice of what he called captioning. I'm going to propose some captions for thinking about the film. Just imagine them kind of floating under the subtitles or over the top of the screen. They are quotes from Sembene. The first is, "Culture is political, but it is another type of politics. In art, you are political, but you say, we are, not I am." Second quote, "As far as I'm concerned, I am no longer supporting notions of purity. Purity has become a thing of the past. I constantly question myself. I am neither looking for a school nor a solution, but asking questions and making others think." Last quote, "Language is cinema. It can be political images or not. As soon as you have two human beings, if they don't speak the same language, there are problems communicating. And people not only talk, but cry. Language is necessary. Let's say cinema is a universal language, but it also has a grammar. It has metaphors, and it depends on each country, each culture," end quote. Again, sort of think of those as sort of lingering there under the frames as you watch them pass. It mentions also metaphors. I'll leave you with one that I suppose will fall into your laps. It's probably worth thinking about vehicles in this film. Thank you.
So please welcome back John Mowitt.
Thank you. I guess I'll wait a sec and let people who want to get out to go. The film that we've just watched, and for a minute there I was getting concerned it would be even more different from the film that Sembene finished in 1974.
What you just saw was mental illness in monkeys.
Mental illness in monkeys. And that comment was from a mentally ill monkey, I assume. This is a film which, in my opinion, is an important film, perhaps the chef d'oeuvre of Sembene. It's a film also which, as I was just suggesting, was finished in 74 in a slightly different form than what we have seen. It was very aggressively censored in Senegal, and in fact, before it could be distributed, there were, I believe it were 11, I've seen actually different counts of how many cuts were demanded before it could go into distribution. That said, I think one of the ways to think about what makes it such an important film is to characterize it as what I'll call a metacolonial vision. I owe you an explanation as to why I'm insisting upon that formulation. In 1996, at the Pan-African Film Festival in Houston, I had the very good fortune to meet and talk to Sembene. He was there promoting and touring with his most recent film, Galvar. Among the many questions that were put to him by those in the small group having conversation with him was the question, to what extent is the concept of post-colonialism, then a hotly debated issue in the US and the UK, relevant to your work? And without hesitation, he replied, not at all. As I metabolized the disappointment produced by this unexpected answer, he added, those who think we in Africa are beyond or after colonialism are badly mistaken. Colonialism has not ended. What we face today is meta-colonialism. As to clarify, he explained, colonialism is now exceeding its wildest dreams in the failures of independence. None of us involved in this conversation, I'll confess, were quite prepared to risk the obvious rejoinder. Yes, post-colonialism. In insisting then on his word, metacolonialism, I pay him feeble yet very sincere homage. But I also want to emphasize that what we are both pointing to, I think, is to the unlivable and impure, and I'm going back to one of my captions, if you will, impure realities of the national project in the wake of colonialism. Senegal cannot be what it was, but nor can it simply become itself. A linguistic symptom of this situation is expressed in the word corruption, that all political parties, whether indigenous or international, routinely hurl into the face of this dilemma. Under these circumstances, Sembene's call for another politics, again, I'm referring to one of my captions, resonates provocatively. Indeed, it follows us around as much as does the music that follows El Hadj out of Ngon's bungalow. But the second thing I want to stress is why vision? Why a metacolonial vision? And I have 2 points to make, and I'll try to be quick. At the risk of driving to distraction those students of mine who have come tonight, I want to acknowledge that vision is a term that I borrow from the work of Lucien Goldman, who used it as a way to talk about how the form of literary expression might be said to correspond to the lived experience of members of particular social classes. Famously, he argued that the disintegration of the French middle class during the post-war and anti-colonial period corresponded to the formal dismantling of narrative to be found in the Nouveau Roman, the new novel. This class and that novel shared, in his mind, the same world vision. Now, what Goldman never managed to do was to consider the role of print when thinking about world vision and the novel, whether in French or not. Sembene, who is as well known, shifted from writing novels to making films, could not afford this luxury. The question of vision, and specifically the cinema as a way to give form to a lived national experience, whether that of a particular class or not, could not be avoided. To say then, as I have, that Xala rigorously expresses the vision of metacolonial nationalism in Senegal means that it seeks to give form to this unlivable lived experience, while at the same time, and I think this is crucial, situating the very medium of vision within that paradox. In short, as we justly celebrate Sembene as a teller of African stories, we need also to insist upon the fact that he was a filmmaker who thoughtfully bent his stories and the medium of their expression toward one another, fully aware that the cinema had inherited, however restlessly, a certain epic responsibility, but one whose coherent realization called for him to abandon purity, to fashion the local grammars of a medium thought to speak a universal language of images, and to do so in the name of another politics. Now, those are some very general ways, I think, to begin talking about what I think is the remarkable achievement of this film. But let me stop there. I think there are a lot more specific sorts of things that people would obviously like to explore, and let's take the time to do it.
Ushers with microphones on each side, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and let them know, and they'll bring you a microphone, and if you can wait until you can ask your question. Right back there, there's someone right here.
Oh, yes, okay. I'm reaching this behind you.
Is the spitting scene that ended, is that a ritual that actually is part of any traditional culture?
It is, and do you have one of the programs? There's a very useful discussion of it there, but just very quickly, it does have Islamic roots as a kind of ritual of purification and purgation. And clearly in that scene, we're being asked to sort of think about the true cause of the Xala and how it is that a blind seer understands the conditions under which this will have to be addressed and removed, as it were. And what you learn very vividly is the sort of family betrayal that has created the circumstance under which the sort of affluence, if you will, and the class status of Elage becomes possible. So yes, it's not something that Sembene dreams up here to sort of figure out a way to end this particular film. It does seem interesting, some of the detail of it. In other words, there's a kind of presenting us with the sort of loading up of the spit, the careful spooning out of the yogurt and the drinking down of the drinks and there is a very sort of interesting sort of gendering of the scene where he's asked to put on the bride's, right? The little piece that holds down the veil on her head. And I think there's a kind of even sort of homoerotic piece to that as well. And it strikes me that there's something about that he's working with here that will far exceed the sort of expectoration traditions that, again, are very nicely discussed in that brochure there. So thanks for that, and I think you'll find some more that's of use to you there as well.
Hello, thank you for the explanation that you just gave about the spitting. I just wanted to add to that that I'm Senegalese, and I met Sembene. Sembene was a friend of mine too.
Lovely. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. But it's not something that I have seen in my lifetime in Senegal. And to just reassure people here, it was something that we do not do that in Senegal. And honestly, it was something I could not watch myself because just how you feel. But I think it goes beyond all that. It's a way of Sembene trying to explain or to put actually that person in pure humiliation as he had done to those beggars. And in Senegal, it's one thing that we respect. And if you know a little bit about the literature and films and actually the literature, I would say there is another wonderful book called La Grève des Mbatou, where you have to respect, it doesn't matter how the person is, whether it is a handicap or whatever, you have to respect people in general. And that's why I think one other aspect that Sembene wanted also to portray in here, and just put that Elage, who was an uppity, in the greatest form of humiliation that he can ever imagine. So that's what I wanted to add to that.
No, I think that's very important. I also do think that one of the things that is very prominent in that scene is that the group of figures that we have seen, the Yalvan, the disfigured, nomadic group there, is a very particular group of beggars, and are typically distinguished from your sort of ordinary beggars. And what's interesting, I think, about that scene when Elage invites the president to his office and insists that he gets rid of, there's a sort of interesting indiscriminate gathering together of all these different groups, whereas it's quite clear the important group that will bring about the fitting form of humiliation is precisely this group. Interestingly, joined by the man who has been robbed, who is a bit of a stock character, right? Again, speaking of the sort of literary sources here, but then also the hawker of Kaddu. They have been brought into this particular group as a result of that sort of joining through the hounds of hell when they're picked up outside of his office. But I think that it's important to stress the specificity, not just that Gorgui, the blind one, is there and he has been wronged, but this group has a kind of moral authority, right? And I think too you need to see there the way that the plot is wrapping in on itself. In other words, that we start out with two space invasions. One is of the Chambre de Commerce and the other is the private property. And, you know, we have a kind of neat way of winding around to the different ways in which those two things pull against one another and put him in the middle at a point where we can say, I see what's at stake in his abasement.
Yeah, well, my comment is kind of redundant now. It's just the fact that it seems like the humiliation is what is regenerative, and that's been built up to throughout the film by him looking so stupid in all these different situations, yet trying to put on something else. And it's the moment when he actually is just making himself available to be totally humiliated that he kind of attains some sort of redemption.
Right.
I didn't notice this before when I watched the film, but at the beginning when the ministers are all speaking, I'm pretty sure the president says something about father or fathers of the nation, père de la nation. And it's interesting because in the Sembene class, we've talked a lot about how Rama, his daughter, is kind of set up as this problematic figure who's a sort of conscience for a new Senegal in a way, in this notion of being a mother of the nation, as is often articulated in national
Right,
projects.
right. Sure.
And so, I guess I'm interested in hearing what you think about that tension between those two things in the film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does seem to me that if we take seriously this point about Sembene rejecting, as he says, purity, and linking that to what he calls self-questioning, one of the things we have to expect is that, in effect, no position that is laid out in the film is a secure position, is an untainted, is an uncompromised position. So this includes Rama as well, who both seems to be, speaking this kind of almost sort of nativist authenticity. I'm going to speak the language of our people. When he's challenging her, she's standing up to him and saying, I'm going to answer you in the way I wish. And then she's, clearly collecting movie posters, and she rides around on a moped, and there's all kinds of things about her that clearly seem to be saying something entirely different. I think the same sort of thing might be said about the Chambre de Commerce. That is to say, they are on the one hand presented as in the overture as the liberators of the country. Right? And in that sense, Père de la Nation, right? I mean, that they are really starting something. At the same time, the whole mechanism here and play, whatever it is that we feel about El Hadj in the end, when he's excluded, right? We still have a certain kind of sense of the way in which Sembene wants us to see that group as utterly discredited. When he is replaced by Cheli, right? You clearly see the way in which this Père de la Nation is a hallucination, right? And that, I mean, and part of the reason he got in trouble with this film, right, is because of precisely those kinds of things, where those figures do not remain unscathed. Rama's position is not uncomplicated. Nobody's quite in the position of judging anyone else except Gorgui, right? The figure in the end who seems to be holding the key, right, to what's going on. And all that he is saying is, look, if you want something, if you want your gender identity, you want to be a man, I'm just telling you the recipe. This is what you have to do. So I think that there are ways in which, we do see something very important about the way Sembene understands gender as a political phenomenon here. But I do want to say that I think even though there seems to be a lot of emphasis and affirmation of Rama's position, and this whole father of the nation thing seems to be ridiculed, she's not in a position there to sort of have an absolute judgment in relation to that, is what I would suggest. And this is the price you pay for this. It's an impure condition. There's sort of no absolute standpoint from which to judge others. And we work it through.
I was just thinking, of course, there's another book by Aminata Sofal. It's called The Ex-Père de la Nation, which is an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Senghor. Let's see, there were just a couple of things I want to say. One was that Jesus also healed with spit, rubbing in clay, and I really wanted to get that into the program notes, and there wasn't room for it, but I thought we should balance this by saying that Christians do this too, or did long ago. Huh?
In fact, there was, just to sort of bring it into a completely different sphere, and I suspect you know about that, I mean, there was great uproar about a decade ago in the bakers' unions in France because they were told they couldn't spit on their hands to work with dough.
Right. I think the question I want to ask you just answered. I wanted to ask you what you meant by unlivable And I think you've just shown how everybody's in an
Yeah, I
impossible
mean,
position.
I don't, the thing that I don't like is the sort of vocabulary of the impossible and, you know, the dead-end vocabulary of a certain kind of thinking about this stalemate. I want to emphasize much more the sense of there not being any easy way out. You know, the option, there's no clear good option. There are lots of possibilities, and they rub up against one another in very awkward ways sometimes, and that's just the post-colonial condition, if you will. And so I'm using that expression to kind of hint that I don't particularly like a certain way of talking about this, whereas I do, you know, there is a sense in which one has to be frank about how complicated this political settlement has become.
But I think maybe what's at the back of my question is life unlivable for ex-colonized people like the Senegalese in a way that it's not for us? And then I don't feel like there's any uncompromised choices for us either.
No, I mean, in the sense that when I'm setting this up here, it seems very clear that the film wants us to sort of consider as a set of very particular kinds of, I guess we could call them political strategies. One of the ones that it is unflinchingly critical about is the sort of notion of negritude, the going back and recovering sort of the black essence, right? When that party scene is unfolding and there's the sort of very sort of racist humor there, and the sort of critique of, you know, how negritude has traveled everywhere, as that framing of the doorway opens out, you see the Senghor character dancing with Umi, and you realize, okay, that's not an option, right? Now, you know, we could do translations like that. In other words, we could figure out in what way we might want to think about, you know, some kind of essential populism or some kind of essential radical democratic spirit, and what would be the cultural and political resources for that. I think we could do that kind of thing. And in that respect, I'm not saying there's something unique. There is certainly something distinctive, and it's the specific ways in which we hit the cul-de-sacs, right? And we're also being told here in a kind of an interesting and provocative way that African socialism is not producing independence. So those two polarities of a way of thinking about the way ahead in the film are being presented to us as non-starters. And the point is that under a certain set of conditions, and they're presented to us here in rather constrained terms, we're being asked to consider, so what are the political choices? You know, what forms are they going to take? When we get to Fatkine and we get a little bit further up the road here, you know, it seems to me he's getting more and more friendly to a certain kind of developmental strategy, but not here. And I think part of what makes this such a powerful vision is that it keeps us kind of sitting in that uncomfortable tension point, much like that freeze frame at the end.
I noticed that the Caucasian man that had been in control stayed around.
Dupont, yes.
Okay, I don't remember anybody's name in real life, so I don't remember his either. But he was everywhere, and that struck me. And I also had a comment for me that he represented that there was still this power of colonialism.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know what you thought.
Yeah. No, when I was commenting on Sembene's refusal of the characterization of his project as post-colonial, part of what I was trying to get to is he insisted on this formula, metacolonial, because he wanted to say, just because you have, you know, changed the skin colors of those sitting in that room, that doesn't necessarily mean you've changed anything. And especially if, and I take it to be part of what we're being asked to associate with each of those attaché cases. They've been bought. Right, they've been bought, and they've been bought into, and what does that mean? That means that they've been asked to participate in a certain kind of capitalist developmental system, which will keep much of what the colonial project was all about running smoothly. So I would certainly say that I think that the presence of the white figures on the periphery, once they've been told to come out, then they're asked to sit at the periphery. You know, that's very much the sense of we're seeing the handlers. And Sembene clearly wants us to recognize, you see, this is independence? I don't think so.
Okay. I wanted to report the feeling that I had in seeing what was in those briefcases, even though I'd read the notes and I knew what was coming. Still, the feeling that I had was sour. I was sick to my stomach.
Right.
And in the end, there's the spitting. I think they're linked.
So
I don't know if,
how would you produce that link?
Would,
If you had to
that,
teach this idea, how would you produce that link?
what I'm saying is that when you realize the depth of the corruption, which at least when they were colonized, you knew, they're being puppet handled from outside. And then when it becomes black and local to some degree, you see how ugly and unlivable it is, and you carry that feeling throughout the film, so that at the climax you really do get it, that things have to be sort of spit out, that this is just there's nothing verbal that you can do, there's nothing using any of these paradigms that you can do to clean out that gut feeling, except what they did.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if the way you want to emphasize the connection here is at the level of your reception of those two moments, it seems to me that that's, entirely fitting. That is to say, one looks at the last scene and goes, ugh. And in a sense, as you say, when those attaché cases open and you realize the game's already up, hope disappears, and you have that same kind of falling within, as it were. I guess what I would say, though, is that part of what will be difficult to sort through in all of this is what would it mean to spit out global capitalism? I mean, if we're really trying to figure out why attaché cases, why Mercedes-Benz, why Evian water, why, if that's what we're dealing with, how is that going to happen? Right? And what responsibilities do we have for that? So, I mean, that seems to me to have as its corollary in the film, if you will, something like, what would it mean to spit out your language? Really, what would it mean to spit out your language?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm not trying to be contentious, but I had just some misgivings about your reading of Rama, the daughter in the film, and I guess I'm not swallowing it so easily that she's necessarily hypocritical because she has these film posters or this moped. I think I thought the moped was really fascinating in juxtaposition with all of the cars in the film. Mm-hmm. And also, I wonder if this could be an indication rather that she is more open to not just being a strict reactionary nativist, but you know, incorporating ideas. She has Chaplin on her wall. It's not just any film poster. These are specific film posters. She has another Sembene film on her wall. And I don't know, I don't really have an end to get to. I just wanted to
Well, I think
hear what you have to say.
I think that the term that you've used may have not been deliberate, but let me at least just bring it into the foreground. I don't think she's hypocritical. And that's the way you were responding to me, as though that's what I had proposed. I don't see it as hypocritical. I see her as somebody who is being sort of caught up in and trying to be faithful to very different kinds of worlds. They seem in a certain way, and he gives us an important vision of this, to have something to do with the university, i.e. that's where we actually first see the moped. He makes sure that we see that it's in front of the campus. He makes sure that we understand that she's a student, and one of the things that she's trying to do is she's trying to study this language. You know, so that there's a sense there in which this place, the university, which is itself, you know, trying both to be a national institution, but it's also all about making people quite other than just Senegalese. It's that sense of her being a complex and sort of fissured character, not a hypocritical character. So I didn't mean to suggest that.
All right, thank you.
I guess she also has some oratory on her door,
Yes,
you know, and
exactly.
that's someone that's been spent 5 years trying to raise money to make a movie about. I do think that she's compromised, but not. I like the moped. It's a nice choice between the modes of transportation. The moment for me is when her father says, "You don't need anything," and she says, "I don't need anything," and I'm thinking, somebody's paying for your apartment. Somebody, you know, she is still connected to the system, no matter what style she chooses. But I just wanted to add a couple details. One was about the Dupont-Durand character and what he means, and I don't think this adds anything to the way you've theorized it and explained it, but there is a particular guy that Sembene has in mind too, called Jean Collin, who was he married Senghor's niece, and he was the Minister of Interior in Senghor's administration, which was brilliant because a white guy could never become president of a newly independent black country, so he could be the one that had the secrets and knew where the bodies were buried. And then he became the chef de cabinet for Abdou Diouf, so he really was very powerful for 40 years after independence. And I think Dupont-Durand is modeled on him. Although his 70s wardrobe is quite amazing. And then
it was the 70s.
Yeah, but not everybody dressed like that.
or Celli, you know.
One other thing, and that is, you know, again, I think you've made a very nice reading of the ending, and some people seem a little skeptical about whether spit can be healing or whatever, but it's important to me that the camera is circling him while he's being spit on. I mean, that is, we've spent a half an hour saying exclu, 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 and I think in the last scene he's inclus. He's surrounded by these people, and yes, they are humiliating him, but he's in the middle of a group instead of being pushed out, and I think that contrast between that and the fact that the camera makes a full 360 around him is fairly important to the way I feel about the last scene, having at least the potential to recuperate him. I mean, it's a freeze frame. It doesn't go all the way there, but.
Well, and I think it's important too that it's a freeze frame, but it's also it's a fissure because the sound continues, right? So that it's the image that is left in place, fin, you know, and then this other dimension of the film, and it reminds us, you know, that all the way through the film there's been something happening, vaguely diegetically, not always. I mean, we certainly do get the star band, and we certainly do get Samba playing the halam, but it floats up into the space which is the one that survives, that continues on, as it were, at the end of the film. And I do think that that's an important piece of that. Why you get all the way around to where you started from. You don't quite go 360 because that would shoot across directly to the grieving first wife, and then you stop. The image.
I want to go back to Rama, actually, a question. I
Which is
think it's
fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the novel that there's kind of a whole story about this relationship she has with a guy, and it's very healthy and very. It just seems like a total in stark contrast to the kind of very patriarchal sexuality of the rest of the story, and I just was wondering why do you think Sembene didn't really portray her as like a sexual being in the film, or as like or like kind of give voice to her sexual narrative? I think that's interesting. But.
Well, I do think one of the things that's important here is that he's very concerned to put in motion this confrontation of genders, generations, languages, etc. And he seems to be paring the novel down in order to get that as clear as he possibly can into the foreground. Now, one might also want to say that it's precisely because we never, in the film, see Rama in any kind of context that would even begin to resemble a relationship or friends or anything of that sort. You know, there's a way in which she is really restricted to setting in motion this critique of polygamy and doing it in the name of Wolof, the sort of traditional cultural site, if you will, for trying to, in a sense, pose the question of polygamy in Islam and polygamy as it might exist in Western Africa. And I think that when you're trying to get the film to concentrate on this question of languages and how they interact or fail to with one another, you strip the other things out. And so we just get her and she very importantly has to say, all polygamists are liars. That means the words that come out of their mouth cannot be trusted. Right? So it's a way to keep saying, think about the language problem. Think about the language problem.
There is a sense of like inferiority complex from the bourgeois class, like with comments like, and I don't go to Spain anymore because there's a lot of Negroes, and like when the new mother-in-law says, and oh, you're not European, so like it tells Elijah is somewhat sort of not immune to like the Xala because he's not European. What is your concept? What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, I would suggest that it does have something to do with, what we've been talking about under the sort of broad heading of how colonialism is not ended. That is to say, every time some gesture is made to get Elage to think about himself, not as somebody who is a member of this, important social political institution, but as somebody who belongs to something like a cultural tradition or even a neighborhood or a group of language speakers. They keep insisting on the fact that what he seems to be pretending he is, by virtue of his placement in the chamber, is something exceptional, something different, and specifically European. Whereas in fact, what seems to be pretty clear is that he sees himself as absolutely independent of that, completely not involved in this, whereas in fact what I think becomes pretty clear is that he's completely deluded. Yes, of course he is. And when he's pushed finally out, he accuses them all of being that. You're basically all acting like these crooks. Right? And we're doing nothing here, but we're robbing our own people in the way that colonialism robbed us. And we thought that we had risen up against. I mean, it's a film which, it strikes me, is very deliberately starting with an overture meant to capture, in as stripped down a logic as you could possibly get, the event of anti-colonial revolt. That's the first 8 minutes. The whole rest of the film is sort of saying, did anything really happen?
Yes, and I would say a lot had happened.
Well,
adding to that.
It has. It has. But clearly in this film, he's saying, where do we get to?
Exactly.
Where did we get to?
And I wanted to add a little bit about Rama. I think Sembene had portrayed that one in a way to just remind all of us back home, you can, no matter, and there are so many sayings in Wolof, for example, such as, a trunk could be as long as possible in a river or in the water. Never would it be or transform itself to a crocodile. You can imitate these Europeans and all that, but still, you're not them. You have to know, and where you're from, you have to know who you are. And I think that's what Rama was trying to tell her father, and choosing deliberately to talk to him, even though she's a student, to talk also, and only in Wolof. Just, Dad, come back. This is your reality. You can put on this suit or whatever, drive this Mercedes and all that, but you are, and you are just Senegalese, you are African. And just being on that whatever you call it, motoped or whatever, that motor thing that she was driving, and wearing an African gown, I mean, it speaks a lot. I want to be authentic. I want to be me. I'm going to the university, yes. I'm going to use all the tools that are available to me, but still, I will remain myself. I think that was very powerful that she's choosing to really talk in Wolof and also dress the way that she was dressing and just speaking the truth, even though she's emancipated, modern, and all that, but still, let me think for myself. I don't want to be told what to say, what to do.
Right.
As you are being told, or you just being part of them, being corrupted. And that's mainly another reason why this film was banned in Senegal, because I think Sembene also wanted to show the government that, yes, you are all corrupted. These people are still here, and you are still buying into whatever they are giving you.
Right. No, I agree. The thing that I would add is that it strikes me as important, and this comes back to something that Charlie said earlier, it strikes me as important that in the confrontation in his office, when he is, on the one hand, saying, look, there are certain things that you just don't need to be involved in. She is asked, do you need anything? She says, no. What do you want? And she says, it's not that I want. Right? I want you to make my mother happy. And it seems to me that there's something there that makes it not, she's not just a figure of self-affirmation. In other words, she's saying, what I need is something that others need. And in particular, my mother needs from you. So that there's just that slight bit of pullback from a kind of complete, I'm my own person, I'm doing what I want to do, and, the hell with you.
But to touch on that and what you said, I think it's really important that she's the first person in the final scene to say, Papa has guests. Like, we have
En
to...
français.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And she's the first person who says it because I think that's really significant because it's saying that the reckoning has to happen there with that group of people.
Yeah.
That he may have gone out as far as possible in terms of the limits of what's acceptable in that society. But this is where he can be brought back in.
Right, right. And again, that would be a point at which to say the insistence of speaking in Wolof becomes strategic there. Because she knows that what she wants to happen for someone else will require that she compromise there.
By speaking French.
Yeah.
Did you realize that also? Sorry. That El Haj himself, whenever he got in trouble,
Yes.
he chose Wolof.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
it was just, it was so paradoxical just to listen to Rama at the end, as she mentioned, saying, okay, Daddy, it's time now to come back to your people, to come back to reality. This is your reality, and you have to come back to it if you want to be healed.
Yeah.
It was just, I think it was beautifully done by Sembene.
somebody up there.
Just kind of going along with speaking of language as sort of this symbol of national pride and everything, something that I was really intrigued by that he didn't address, and I'm not sure how he would have, it would have been a whole different issue, is that Wolof, even though it's kind of seen as the Senegalese language, is really only one of a number of languages from a number of ethnicities, and so that's kind of, from my understanding of it, Wolof is was sort of the preferred, the favorite ethnicity by the colonists, so that there's become sort of a Wolofization, I guess, of Senegal as a whole. And so I was just wondering if you, in studying Ousmane Sembene, if you would run into him talking about these sort of conflicts between ethnicities, or the idea of the sort of domination of Wolof as a product of colonization or anything like that.
He talks about it constantly, and he's, fascinated by it. I think this would be another way of opening up a slightly different kind of question about Rama's position in all of this, because what you're saying is entirely true. That is to say that there are these other languages, and the question of to what extent Wolof is representative is a deeply political question. I mean, already right there. So the thing I guess I would have to say is that though you hear a bit of Arabic here, basically it's a two-party system. The film is trying to implot a confrontation between these two languages. Now, there may be something that he is himself not letting into the picture, as it were, which has to do with precisely the history of language politics in the country. And, we can certainly pressure him on the issue. I've not really seen him respond directly to that kind of a question. But the issue, even within Senegal, which languages are dominant, is something he's never not thinking about.
Yeah, and he grew up in a place where at least 3 of them were spoken in the village where he was a kid, and he speaks some Mandinka, a fair amount of Jola along with Wolof. Right.
Yeah.
I was going to hold my peace, and then you just raised something in the last couple minutes talking about Rama speaking French in that last scene and so on. And it's this, does it make a difference to how you read the last scene that that's actually Sembene's own house that he's bringing the beggars into, and that El Hadji is being spit on? And I mean, there's some way in which, he's putting himself in the El Hadji position to be spit upon and have these people visit him and so on.
The thing that I didn't touch on at all in what I had to say tonight, but it seems to me extraordinarily important, namely, why is the film named Xala? And partly it seems to me that it's got something to do with the way in which he wants to take into the medium the problem that he's putting in front of us. And every time you get to a space like his own home, and the scene in which the thing is being resolved is taking place there, it seems to me quite interesting that if you sort of stretch the metaphor, of the fourth wall as the sort of space of representation, and you think a little bit about camera and chamber and room and where these things are taking place, it starts to become an interesting treatment, as I was suggesting in my earlier remarks, about the medium of the cinema as a place where we're going to struggle with this question of power and potency. And do we get access to it, and in what forms, and what difference will it make? All become incredibly important issues, not just sort of in terms of the political life of the nation, but in terms of this medium and his own sense of what can I do with this? Is it a pedagogical tool? Is it night school, which is a metaphor he uses? Or, is it a different kind of thing, which grapples with these same kinds of problems of to what extent is it compromising with a particular kind of world market and a technology and a set of traditions about how to tell stories in this meeting? Is it compromising there in a way that renders it impotent as a political mechanism to bring the questions to the fore that needs to bring to the fore? To me, it makes, I mean, it's a little bit of kind of like outsider knowledge, but it's an important fact that if you recognize the house, you know that it's there and that in a certain way this film has to stop there.
Yeah, and I mean, he advertises all the time that he built it with his own hands, and in some of the films, I think you even see the name he gave the house, which is Gallo Cedo, on the plate outside, so.
Yeah. And in that film, too, you see him give himself names.
The other villa was the villa of the USAID director in Dakar, where the wedding takes place. I won't ask you what to make of that.
Well, with that, it might be, I think, we're coming to the end of our evening.
Okay. Thank you all very, very much.